Hey, good morning, patriarchs, matriarchs, the lovers of freedom and liberty and justice for all. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm running for the 2024 presidency of the United States because I'm coming out of nowhere with the most important, profound information in the history of the last 20 years at least, maybe possibly ever. Who the fuck am I to make such a bold declaration? Well, the guy that actually went the distance to be able to tell you what it is that I've been telling you this whole time. But this is how it's actually on display this morning, and I just felt like I had to hit record on the computer and just riff about this morning because it's just extraordinary what's going on. What I'm going to start with is Fox News and really all things Tucker Carlson and the conservative movement, particularly since last Friday, as it results to Elon Musk's proclamation of the Twitter files, particularly as it relates to, I think, one of the greatest journalists of our generation and possibly ever, until he actually flipped into something that he's not anymore. And his name is Matt Taibbi. Matt Taibbi is probably the front runner of Gonzo journalism as it relates to corrupt financialization at the heartbeat of it all. He was a Manhattan-based journalist for, and I'd say muckraker journalist for Rolling Stone magazine. And Rolling Stone magazine, of course, created Gonzo journalism with the founder, Hunter S. Thompson, who was one of the greatest minds until he absolutely destroyed it because he was an alcoholic and a drug addict. But because of that, he's had some particular insights that were very interesting. You might want to compare him in journalism to somebody like Jimi Hendrix and playing the guitar as a heroin addict. I mean, that was that generation. But I'll tell you, Hunter Thompson saw truths about the bigger picture of humanity and American citizenship and how our government is supposed to function, given the notions and its premises of liberty and justice for all, where it fell short. And ultimately that evolved into Matt Taibbi. His father was a journalist. Taibbi was actually a professional basketball player in Russia, of all things, in the minor league and Eastern Europe. And he just had an incredible sensibility. And he became a journalist in Moscow before he came back to the United States. And this guy had a wit and insight that I think was maybe on par with Thomas Paine and common sense, that led to the revolution in the United States. But what took place last Friday in the Twitter files was the revelation that tech company Twitter had been working potentially with the Biden administration to not post naked pictures of Hunter Biden, who was involved with a sort of online porn scenario and a drug uh, binge that I think a lot of people are guilty of out there, that are hypocritically saying things like, oh my God, it's a massive cover up. Now, meanwhile, those same people that are saying that sort of situation are the same people that would be, on the same side of Hobby Lobby, who would tell their female employees that they couldn't get an abortion, for example, or, let's say Chick-fil-A over the last couple of years, not wanting to serve those that are part of the LGBTQ sort of self-designation. And, in many of those court cases, I believe it got to the Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court came down on the business owner's right to be able to serve whom they please. And in this particular case, the former CEO and vertical and the investors and everything else, may have been, if you want to, paint it with a broad brush, people that may have leaned Democratic Party, for example, and maybe prevented that type of information from being seen in threads on Twitter. But that was, of course, based on these cases that I've brought to your attention, and that many of you would have supported, was the same thing. And now we're with Elon Musk, and Elon Musk, in my sort of pronouncement, is the ultimate, shall we say, expression of Citizens United. It's really money is speech. This whole thing is framed as free speech, but Elon Musk spent $46 billion that he financed, and he financed because of the great wealth and the great value of the Tesla stock that he could use through this financialization, which works for people that are, way, way, way above the line. And Elon was able to blast through and battle the shorts and all of the things that Wall Street did to try to keep him down. And he overcame it to become the richest man in the world. in which he was able to purchase Twitter so that he could have the Twitter files. But he's using it for a platform that, from where I'm sitting, appears, like I've got a lot out there, but I've also seen a lot that makes me feel like this whole thing is part of a larger, broader movement for a conservative outcome, and whatever role that Elon plays in that. And I've said this on Twitter a few times actually. I've said that Elon, if he could use this as sort of a Trojan horse to convert conservative people to accept renewable energy, fucking A. That would be one of the most ingenious moves of all time. I don't know if that's his actual objective, but if it comes along with whatever's going on, I'm all for it. But I'm all for free speech, okay? I'm not all for saying you're for free speech and then using it to cherry pick free speech in a way that's going to paint the picture that you want to paint. That's not free speech. That's basically Citizens United. Those who have the most money get heard the loudest. And that's exactly what I think is going on. And I'll parlay that to the point that I'm trying to make this morning, which is I've been paying a lot of attention to Tucker Carlson and Fox News in general, which takes Tucker Carlson's lead. And the reason I'm watching really almost aghast and blown away, but also hopeful, is that they're all trumpeting regulation because of the Sam Bankman-Fried fraud and everything that imbues. Not to mention, of course, what appears to be donations to the Democratic Party. Now, obviously, the Fox News and its spirit of free speech and everything else that it's bringing to the table, which is entertainment, not journalism, because they actually beat the rap on a libel suit last year, just like Rachel Maddow did, that their attorneys on both MSNBC platforms and Fox stated that their platforms are not journalism and that people that are their audience do not expect facts from the co-hosts or the hosts that they like that are spewing opinion. I mean, that was the court decision. And that's, by the way, another example of monkey wrenching the law that's going to be just the opposite of the intent of what we think is happening in the courts. But that's what, law firms do. They pervert, distort, and create these kind of crazy mosaics where a judge would be like, oh, yeah, well, the audience did not expect fact. What are you talking about? They don't expect fact. It's propaganda all day, every day. When somebody like Fox, for example, is now preaching, and I think it's fantastic, but at the same time, it's a little bit confusing. But I'm going to use it to paint a broader point. So everybody at Fox right now is screaming for regulation, financial regulation. Why? Because they want to embarrass the Biden administration, which, of course, in this larger framing is like, look, they held down Trump and this information that would have gotten Trump elected, and they're the enemy. And then, oh yeah, by the way, blood libel and all of these other kinds of frickin' Pizzagate, Epstein sort of scenarios that somehow play into Biden, even though Biden had nothing to do with Epstein. But just for an example. But going back to my point about deregulation in the financial markets, Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and this mosaic of what took place with Alameda, which was creating tokens out of thin air called FTT tokens that created through market makers some sort of collateral valuations that Sam was basically stealing investor money and capital to throw into derivatives. Now, that opaque sort of scenario is the exact reason why Bitcoin and crypto and all of the different technologies and blockchain were created in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis. Now, as it turns out, all of these things were happening long in advance. Like most of everything that's occurring now and has been for some time has its basis in the 80s. And so a lot of these like computer scientists and these genius guys that could write code and everything else, a lot of them were libertarians, and libertarians in the sense that they didn't trust big government. They didn't trust overreach. And so they tried to outsmart the machine by creating a new machine. And that had been evolving over the course of decades and decades and decades. And by the time you get to 2008, lo and behold, this pseudonym by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody knows, but a lot of people think is a guy from potentially a computer scientist, I believe. Many have pinned it down to a guy, I think it looks like he might be out of the UK because of apparently the way certain messages were written based on, the usage of certain apostrophes and everything in the UK version of English, which is English, and then there's American English and Australian English and that sort of thing. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that the blockchain technology that was built, to create this option to fiat currency and central bank control and everything else, and what these guys had thought, these computer scientists had thought going back to the 80s, was that we would be controlled ultimately by the invisible hand, I guess, of the dark shadow of government that could get in, and if they could control your money, they could control your life. And so that was the sort of genesis. And then what happened during the 2008 great financial crisis is it proved that there was trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars that suddenly emerged to be able to backstop this criminality that was happening on Wall Street. And so lo and behold, this guy Satoshi Nakamoto just shows up and says, here it is, blockchain. And then we got the servers, and then we got all of the blockchain writers, and it became a thing. And it just seems like, a lot of the guys that are involved with that are these, computer science whiz kids that got involved, and it became almost like a video game, but a video game that created this value. And then we created all of these currencies around the world that people could trade in, and they could go on these platforms, and these crypto platforms, not to confuse Bitcoin and crypto, but for those of you tracking, understand what I'm talking about, that, ultimately, what the point that I'm trying to get to in the dialogue is that this entirety with Alameda and FTX proves just the opposite. It's the antithesis of exactly why blockchain and Bitcoin was created to begin with. Now, crazily enough, the notion of blockchain really is an incredible idea and solution to one of the biggest problems that exists. All of these things manifest from the 2008 great financial crisis. Literally all of them. Everything is on display. Not to mention other crimes and frauds that had taken place long before that. Sam Bankman-Fried is a caricature of control fraud. Everything that we show you in the con at www.thecon.tv is a manifestation of what Sam Bankman-Fried did. Now, ironically, I don't think SBF had any understanding of how what took place happened before, and I don't think he tried to mirror it necessarily. I do think he tried to mirror one aspect of it, which I'll get to. But ultimately, the blockchain does provide, ironically, this ability, because of the democratization of how the code is written, to be able to make sure that everything that goes into that code is lock, stock, and barrel. So you know that the value of what you're trading in actually came from a source that you know is real and is legit, and didn't have middle players basically doing what took place in the 2008 great financial crisis, which is the collateralization, and the credit default swaps and all of the derivatives. And by the way, it was revealed yesterday that the derivatives, the notional derivatives value of what's going on in Europe right now is beyond what took place in 2008. So warning bells, again, red flags. We've seen, like, I think we saw Lunix and I might get some of the names of these cryptocurrencies messed up, but there was like two of them, Luna, I think it was, and I can't remember the other one that went bankrupt over the course of the last several months that was preceding FTX and crypto, or Alameda. And there's a whole lot of reasons why Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX were maneuvering to be able to save other companies to save themselves, sort of thing. And that's going to all play out in the bankruptcy and everything else. But going back to my premise about how everything is now shining a light that this sort of outrage is now partisan. It's a Republican and Democratic, or I should say all the people that kind of constitute sort of the voting public, are now all on the same page that where's the regulation? Okay? How is this stuff happening? And it's happening because of a whole lot of stuff. It's happening because of the way it was set up. It's happening because there's 134 companies that are used LLCs that are offshored, and all of the different sort of accounting principles and geopolitics and who has jurisdiction and all of these other things between the SEC, because is it a security or is it a commodity, and the FTC, and all of these different sort of things. You got to have an understanding of how the systems actually work to be able to solve the riddle of what is actually going on. But what I'm trying to tell you, and what I'm trying to get to, is now everybody realizes this is the first time in my life, okay? And this is the first time really over the course of the last 20 years, even though the con and everything that I say on Patrick Lovell truth bombs and everything else is about this. You've got to have regulation. You've got to have laws and rules and accountability for the power in democracies. Otherwise, it becomes a runaway train wreck of monopolies and oligarchs, or the new aristocracy, which is exactly what the United States was born and revolted against to become separation of powers, which is all on display in the Constitution. So what you have now is you have this sort of gymnastics, hypocritical approach for people on the right specifically, and the left too, there's no doubt, but I'm going to use the right initially to paint the picture that they're all screaming about regulation. They're all screaming about free speech. They're all screaming about all of these things that are supposedly in service to democracy, for and by the people, but it's manipulation. It's manipulation and tactics where it's like, look, we're going to tell you about all of the corruption that took place with Sam Bankman-Fried donating millions upon millions of dollars. We know that it was like $36 million to the Democrats in the midterms, but oh, hey, nod and wink, we're not going to tell you about the 30 plus million that it appears that Sam Bankman-Fried also provided the Republicans that they used to these dark, backdoors, which is enabled by Citizens United. That's called dark money. And the Republicans are masters at this shit, and they've done it because the Kochs built this goddamn empire, as well as all of the other billionaires in the oil industrial, military industrial sort of side of the house. The billionaires of this country are either oil, military industrial, real estate, commodities, or of course tech, okay? And the tech tends to go a little bit more liberal because they come out of, the Bay Area, these genius, coders and everything else. And then, all of the guys that are born into the aristocracy of the oil empires, they go back, really till post World War II, is this sort of Jim Birch society on the right. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that everything is like an upside down inverse perverse of what reality is, okay? And this is what I've been trying to teach you from day one. So common sense is that if, for example, I'm your best friend and and I know I've got the evidence that your wife is cheating on you, and I want you to have the information, I need to not give you thoughts about what's going on in this. I go out and I got the facts, right? I could show you what she did, when and how, to fill in the blanks of what you were postulating might be making sense, that she might be up to no good. But then I give you the evidence on a platinum platter, and you make the choice. You either stay in the relationship because you think it's worth it and you're going to forgive her and all of that sort of thing, or you're going to be like, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm going to get a divorce. We'll move on. We'll cut this up and I'll move on to greener pastures, or however that works out. That's kind of how it works when you have factual evidence. It's not me cherry picking scenarios to tell you certain things that I want to create and manipulate an outcome, which is exactly what Fox is doing in this particular case. And I dare say Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk, with this scenario about free speech, and he's going to do, this massive revelation of what, Biden did with Hunter Biden's, laptop, which just to me is small potatoes in comparison to what I'm talking about. Not to mention all the stuff that Trump's been engaged with. Trump has been up to his eyeballs in prosecutable felony fraud over the course of the last 30 years. He should have been in jail long before he got to run for president. The fact that he didn't get arrested is just a reflection of how it works, because Trump does what a lot of the big guys do, and they literally own the law. As I demonstrated in my filibuster to the American people on 11/1/22, I got to a point where I did an interview with the financial business editor of the New York Times, who's written 2 fabulous books, one about Trump and Deutsche Bank called Dark Towers, and the other was about a huge law firm out of Cleveland that's been involved deeply with corporate power for a long time, and they basically create outcomes in the political sphere and all sorts of other things, and they're called Jones Day. But all of the major law firms in the Beltway area and Wall Street are the same. In fact, it was interesting that David Enrich decided to tell that story about a Cleveland massive corporate law firm when, there's some others that I think are even more revelatory, primarily Sullivan and Cromwell. Sullivan and Cromwell, I also laid out in my filibuster to the American people on 11/1/21, is the intersection and the crucible of everything, okay? Sullivan and Cromwell represented the consortium of the too big to fail banks in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis. And I presented an interview that came from the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, where the partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, a gentleman by the name of Roger Cohen, revealed 3 absolutely monumental scenarios that bring everything full circle of what I've been trying to tell you. And the fact that I'm the only one that has been telling you this is the emperor's new clothes. It's every freaking fable that you can ever possibly imagine, because the madness and the sea and the ocean of noise is so loud and so polluted and so stupid between Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson and Anderson Cooper and our government and everybody else, where there's so much noise, there's so much confusion that nobody is telling you exactly what happened, how it happened, who did it, when and why, and what it created and for what purpose. And the intersection of it all is Federal Reserve Act 13.3, in which Roger Cohen reveals to the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission that A, there was never a legal precedent that would allow for what took place in the aftermath of 2009. The only time it ever came close was in 1987, after a technical glitch basically shut down markets and none of the primary dealers could have their overnight trades cleared. So the Federal Reserve stepped in and basically enabled that, but until they could clean up the mess of the technical problem, which would, if they didn't, it would have seized global capital markets. But it was understandable that they had to basically, because of the computer glitch, just keep everything flowing. So they created these lender of last resort exigent loans at that time period. Now, as it turns out, which was also revealed in my filibuster on 11/1/22 with an interview with a gentleman by the name of Art Wilmarth, who is the top legal mind in the United States as it relates to financialization and all of the things within government policy, particularly in light of the biggest stopgap for the American people that took place after the Great Depression, a law by the name of Glass-Steagall, which he is, and has been basically, pushing, and that's why I put him in, my live, case to the American people, because what he reveals is that in 1991, of all things, Goldman Sachs looked to create a wider box and a little bit more, shall we say, in the moment version of what exigent lending is on behalf of the Federal Reserve, which a lot of people think is independent of Congress, but as it turns out, it's not supposed to be, but it acts that way. That's another aspect of what it is, and the clarity of the truth that I'm trying to tell you is that there's always this myth, the smoke and mirrors, to where you can't see the forest for the trees. Because again, going back to the metaphor about your wife, cheating on you, I either, as your best friend, I'm going to tell you the facts as they are and let you make up your own mind, or I'm going to manipulate you for an outcome. Maybe I have skin in the game. Maybe I actually bet whether or not you were going to leave your wife or not. Maybe there was some sort of reason that I would give you some information that you would act upon that would lead you in a specific direction, which is called asymmetric information, by the way. It's a thing, okay? It's what the CIA has been masters of since they became the CIA. So ultimately, and that's what Wall Street, by the way, got super hip to. And I dare say Wall Street and CIA on many fronts are one and the same, which brings me full circle to what it is that I'm trying to tell you about Roger Cohen and the Federal Reserve Act 13.3 and ultimately what took place. He said, A, there was no precedent. B, it never happened before. C, that Goldman Sachs had argued for a wider box in 1991, which is like a smoking gun to why they did the Big Short to begin with. And then all of that preceded what took place in 2008. Now in 2008, when everything blew up and everybody seems to talk like they know what's going on, and I'm talking about Joe Rogan, I'm talking about Rusty Rockets, which is Russell Brand, and quite frankly, everybody online, whether it's Crystal Ball and Sagar Argenti and all these guys, none of these guys have any idea what the freaking history and the actual facts are as it relates to A, regulation in this country, and then hence deregulation, and how it came out of policy in certain scenarios that provided specific outcomes. Most of this stuff germinated because of the Clinton administration in the late 90s. Through a whole myriad of deregulatory moves that basically got rid of Glass-Steagall because of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and ultimately what came the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which created these derivatives that ultimately bring it full circle, leads us to FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, which was emulating exactly what took place in the 2008 crisis, only fucking poof, out of thin air, he and his market makers create this value for this fucking FTT token that basically he's leveraging, and he's talking about, collateralized trade that blew him up that nobody could have seen coming. Bullshit. That's the way. That's how you grow fucking soup infinitely fast, and then you put a bunch of dumb people that are young that can't actually regulate this stuff, which is called governance, and they just runaway train wreck because what? The investors are trying to get away from the central banks and centralization so they don't get played, but ultimately they get played. Who else was involved? Well, hey, if it's good enough for Tom Brady, if it's good enough for Larry David and Stephon Curry and that female tennis player from Japan, and, of course, everybody's favorite Matt Damon, who not only should have known better, he was the voice of Inside Job, which basically lays out a lot of what I told you, which won an Academy Award in 2011 about the 2008 great financial crisis, but then they had all decided to go to where the money is. The bottom line is everybody always goes to where the money is without any care about the fucking consequences, because the elite, and I'm going to talk about the elite right now, they're all pimps, hoes, and junkies. And so too are everybody who plays their game. Look, we've had over the course of the last 20 years at least, a hostile takeover of corporate America and the machine through the machinations of finance that ultimately did an end round and got complete control of our government because of specific policy, one of which I'll mention is Citizens United, allowing dark money. Money is speech. Again, going back to Elon Musk. No, it's not. These motherfuckers bought the government, bought the rule makers that basically could create the smoke and mirrors, and they could obfuscate, and then they hired the goddamn fucking media to basically say things like, okay, yesterday, this was the craziest thing. Yesterday, this woman on Fox, whose name I can't remember at the top of my head because I don't want Fox business all the time, but I'm studying them right now because it's just so on display. She says, Elon Musk says that the Democrats probably got $1 billion in funding from Sam Bankman-Fried. What do you mean, probably? You're a journalist. Are you kidding me? Probably? Well, maybe someone probably freaking, backdoored you last night while you were, hooking up with some freaking whore or something. I mean, what? This is like, you just making shit up out of thin air. Probably. And then you can say that on national air to be basically, create this constant sort of pump and dump scheme of like, hey, but the bottom line is everybody's calling for regulation. And as they should. And that's what I've been trying to tell you. But what they're trying to do is the smoke and mirrors of blame the other guy so you don't know how this whole thing works. Let me tell you how it works. Federal Reserve 13.3 provided $29 trillion in 2009 to bankrupt financial shadow sector in the forms of, asset managers and, in hedge funds and investment banks and private equity, all of these guys who play all these fucking crazy ass games. And what they did was they choked on their own bets based on fraud, deception, deceit, to steal. That's what the goddamn mob does, okay? And they did it in ways that were just never ending. And that was in 2008. It wasn't yesteryear. This is how the system works. And so ultimately, what's the Fed do? They come in and they basically create this song and dance where the media believes that, look, if Congress doesn't step up with approving this TARP program at $700 billion, the entire world's going to collapse. $700 billion. People are like, oh my God, you can't believe the world's coming to an end. So they did it. And everybody's like, okay, fine. So they got liquidity. They created this thing where they're going to buy back toxic assets. Meanwhile, nobody's asking what the toxic assets are. But $700 billion is like a drop in the fucking bucket. It was $29 trillion at that time. And they pumped another $30 to $50 trillion since then because of what took place in 2019 and what took place in 2020. Different versions of the same thing. Bottom line is the Federal Reserve is a house money for the banks that operate without Congress, and Congress gets paid by it, and you're none the wiser. And so everybody starts to paint the picture. The only thing that matters are the people who are up top that have enough money to buy this system to stay atop, which is the aristocracy, which is not democracy. Get it? And so where we're going is that this version of, autocracy, or I call it, again, I've always called it corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. Okay? So it's like you got these institutions that are supposedly have credibility. They're in these incredible buildings, and they've got these incredible minds, and they've got quants, and they've got all these geniuses that came out of, whether they're legal geniuses or they're, engineering geniuses or software geniuses, and all of these other guys. And they're all in the same house, and they all look great, and they drive great cars, and they live in great houses, and they've got beautiful families, and they're just, beautiful people, right? And it's like, okay, that's what you want to achieve. That's what you want to, you want to try to become, right? So they've got the credibility, but meanwhile, they're all doing it based on smoke and mirrors of what just took place and what everybody's calling for in terms of regulation for FTX. It's like, it's illegal reps and warranties and misrepresentations. So, for example, if you invested in FTX, you did not expect Sam to be able to take your deposit that you're basically putting in there to grow, I suppose, based on the value of the actual exchange. Instead, he gets this token that he bets against, and he goes and creates derivatives trade, and oh, sorry, it all collapsed at the same time. Your money's gone. No problem. But meanwhile, all of it's against the law. Except it's in the Bahamas, so it's not. Unless the Bahamas decides they want to freaking, prosecute it, which they may or may not. But the Bahamas, being, its own sovereign, society, they, part of the reason why they don't is because that's why people put money there. Or the Cayman Islands, or quite frankly, South Dakota. You want to know the truth? South Dakota is the Cayman of all Cayman, and that's what's been going on for like the last 15 years. Same with Utah, same with, I think, what are the other states? I mean, Delaware's been up there for a long time. Nevada's been up there for a long time. A lot of states are trying to become Delaware, but South Dakota apparently is the front racing horse. And so money just tries to go find places where it's not going to pay taxes, where it can hide, and it can be, created illegally. That's not a fucking functioning society. That is not a real economy. That is not free markets. All of this stuff is a myth. We've created over the course of 4 decades what they call neoliberalism, and that is what it is, where you created this fusion between big law and big finance, and also trying to find the cheapest, most advantageous ways to create consumption, and it becomes a myth at the end of the day because it's not your taxes that backstops this. They didn't make this decision at the Federal Reserve to be able to pump $29 trillion through monetary policy to these bad actors vis-a-vis quantitative easing that has nothing to do with fiscal policy. Your taxes are on the fiscal side of the house, not the monetary side, okay? So there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to know. There's a lot to understand. But I continue to try to tell you that they're all lying to you. Everybody's a liar or stupid. And it doesn't mean that they're stupid. They just didn't go the distance to get the information. You got to have capacity. You got to find the people with the right stuff. There's a reason a rocket flies, and there's a reason a rocket blows up. Smart people have got to be responsible for the system running efficiently and correctly. And what happens is it always comes down to integrity. It always comes down to courage in a free society. The professionals betrayed us. The professionals were like, look, a whole bunch of fucking idiots in like 2004 to 2007 bought into the system. They thought their houses were never going to decrease in value. It was caveat emptor. And so when shit hit the fan and everything collapsed and they got run through the courts where millions of people got foreclosed on illegally, and the reason they got foreclosed on illegally was because all of the maneuverings that created the liar's loans to begin with and the securitization of those that wound up in all of these derivatives markets created such an insane mess that nobody could actually bring standing to a court of law to be able to foreclose on someone because the foreclosing parties did not have the deed or the note, or they didn't have standing. They couldn't prove that they were owner to foreclose. There's ways things are supposed to happen in foreclosure, as is in all of the law. And ultimately, they just basically smoke and mirrored it the whole time because we created, poof, $29 trillion out of thin air that went to all the bad actors, to the dealer brokers, and government, Congress, just like they wiped their hands at what the Federal Reserve did, they wiped their hands at what the banks did. And they said, banks, do whatever you're going to do. So the banks, with all this free money, went and bought the courts, and the courts are like, yeah, it's fucked up, but what am I going to do? Go against this machine? I'm going to lose my, retirement and everything I've done. I'm going to go with the flow, whatever, man. These people were suckers. They got into it. They got bankruptcy. So, good luck. Really? We're going to let the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history go by the wayside because everybody was complicit in the failure of the professionals? That's what we're talking about. And so now it's 2022, right? And we've got Sam Bankman-Fried as this linchpin to everything, and I'll bring it full circle for my closure. This is where I was starting with this whole thing, and this is why I decided to go off on this riff. Because the blockchain makes sense in this example especially. When this catastrophic waterfall or tsunami of foreclosures took place, it's because nobody could prove in the transaction who owned what. Supposedly, blockchain solves that riddle. But here's the biggest problem, right? So none of that could happen. If we had the blockchain, and blockchain was the go-to, and it was impenetrable because you had, 100 people that were inside the game programming the blockchain, so everybody could prove that everything in that transaction was exactly the way it is. By the way, that's in the foreclosure process and proceedings is UCC code, and I think it's UCC number 9 that enables that whoever's at the end of the chain who buys the last, who's the last person, if the payment's not there, in the revenue, that they could go foreclose and they would have standing. But meanwhile, all they did was they basically, and I should go into this, they basically documented, they created fraudulent documents with signatures of phony VPs that knew who under the auspices of the court, that everything that they take into the court is what the court relies on, and so it's almost like sacred, because if they get busted for this, they'd lose their license, their entire firms would go under, they'd get thrown in prison. There's all sorts of different remedies for people who lie in court, but they overwhelm the court with lies and tens of millions of lies on documentation fraud based on tens of millions of fraud that were taking place to create these and then sell them into the system that went haywire. So blockchain, honestly, could solve that riddle, right? Because we have what's known as the Registry of Deeds. In the Registry of Deeds, we're supposed to know exactly who has title to the land recordation. And ultimately, that's how we determine that you can't just steal fucking property, which is what the banks did. The banks set everybody up, and then they stole property, and then they stole trillions of dollars from the fucking Fed, and then they bought our government. That's what we're talking about. Corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. And so the blockchain could change all that, but then we get back to the frickin' problem that is the problem of everything. It's integrity and accountability. Okay, so are we going to take out Sam Bankman-Fried if you're a Fox supporter, right? The guy's got to go to jail, right? Okay, meanwhile, forget all the shit that you've said for the last 30 years, but you're right. I'm going to go with you on this one because for once you pulled your head out of your ass. So yeah, let's prosecute Sam Bankman-Fried. That would make a lot of sense. But how about Larry David and all of these other guys, I think under the Florida statute, that they should have had the knowledge of what they were selling, at such a high level, Tom Brady and so forth, that they actually were responsible for the reps and warranties. Now, meanwhile, for anybody who got sick, would you go sue, like at McDonald's, would you go sue some person that was an actor in a McDonald's commercial because you got food poisoning? Would they be on the hook for that? Yeah, I don't think so. Like Larry David said, I don't think so, right? It just gets complicated because the long and the short of it is the reps and warranties need to be the operation where it's, registered, the reps and warranties, and also the securitization and the actual answers. It doesn't have to be so complicated. Again, if it's a security, it goes to the SEC. If it's a commodity, the FTC, and the There should be the right guys with the right stuff because they get paid money. That's their career, to be professionals with good leadership to hold this shit accountable. That's what the United States is supposed to be. Same with judges. Judges who actually, have seen these cases and they recognize, oh, hey, wait a second. This is the 300th case that I've seen documentation fraud. Maybe I should look into this. Maybe I should actually bring this up to the FBI. Did that happen? To my knowledge, no. Why? Because everybody's looking for somebody else to take care of it, and then you come up, back in the 2008 era, you got President Barack Obama shows up after 8 years of the Bush administration, who created all this problem that the Republicans now are like, hey, they want to blame the Democrats for this stuff, but it was the goddamn Bush administration that was the race to the bottom deregulation that created all this madness. So how's that for freaking mental gymnastics? Look, I'm sorry, it is complicated. There's a lot going on, but there's smart people that are professionals that are on the right side of this, that are in the con, that are, the people that I brought to you, the witnesses. There's thousands of them, man. This is not that complicated, ultimately. You know what's complicated? Rocket science, physics, so much in medicine. This is nothing remotely as complicated as the solutions we find every single day. The only thing that we can't control are two things: greed and complicity, cowardice. That's the problem. It's the oligarchs up here that will destroy you all day, every day, because they think it's fun. And my point is, I'm not expendable. You're not expendable. They are expendable. Now, here's the question: How do you want to do it? Do you want to have a revolution? Do you have a revolution where we look like Venezuela or, some other country where we're, ripping these guys out of the street and beheading them in the streets and clubbing them to death and all that kind of stuff? I think we're better than that, honestly. I don't think we should have to do that. I think what we should do is everybody get on the same page. Everybody demand that we put people in office, myself included, or at least run, and then get you the right people that will be able to actually, A, understand these things, and B, solve these problems. That's the way our democracy is designed. We, you, me, the people, are citizens to hold power to account. It's right there in the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to redress grievances. I mean, the bottom line is the most important aspect of the United States and citizenship is for informed people to not accept this, because they're fucking us all, okay? And it's stupid. They're so easily remedied that if you just listen to what I'm telling you, that nobody else will tell you, and you tell everybody around the world that this guy Patrick Lovell knows what he's talking about. He spent the last 7 months laying it out. He's got this show called The Con, www.thecon.tv. He's got this 11-hour filibuster, 10-hour filibuster that's available for free on YouTube at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con, and so much more. If you just dive in and understand that I'm the guy fighting for you. Nobody else is. They're not. Why? Because how far did I go into this? This is like, Jesus Christ, 41 minutes. 41 minutes, and it's like, okay, I barely scratched the surface, really. But the long and the short of it is you need to hear the emotion. You need to understand what we're dealing with here, because it's theft. It's fucking theft. That's it. It's theft. And it's the same type of theft that has existed for hundreds of years, if not a millennium. When absolute power controls, it's one of my favorite sayings, Bastiat. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. It's just stealing by the rich and the wealthy. And then, of course, like Marie Antoinette said right before she had her head cut off, let them eat cake. Oh yeah, fuck you, Marie Antoinette. How'd that work out? Bottom line is, we have prisons. Do you think Jamie Dimon and all the CEOs that have been around for a long time on Wall Street that have been destroying everybody through fraud for a very long time would have a lot of fun going from the penthouse apartment with their own tennis courts and going to wherever they want, whenever they want, and however they want, and tell everybody what to do, to about, an 8x12 cell with no television? Then they got to look at some dude down the freaking hall at Rikers that might be a real danger? Let me tell you, that would be hell. That would be justice enough. That we don't need to get these guys in the corners and do a Mussolini on these guys, because we got prisons that are rat-infested cockroach cages that these guys would want to commit suicide in, just like Epstein. Maybe they'd Epstein themselves. I don't know. Maybe I crossed the line with that one. But the bottom line is, it's a criminal syndicate. It's a racket, and everybody's in on it except for me. or at least everybody who could actually, stop this. I'm telling you, there's a lot of great people who have the answers. Did I say enough? I hope so. Onwards and upwards.